So this is Mark, the boring one of the crafty nihilist.
True.
Yeah. I just been struck by, I think, some parallels between two lots of grisly murders that were separated by decades and a different country, but I think there's important links between them. On one side is the murders of Jack the Ripper in London in 1888. But also, I don't know, maybe less well known for a lot of people anyway, in this country maybe particularly, but also a infamous case which is became known as the Black Dahlia. Both made up names, of course. Jack the Ripper, Black Dahlia. Identity of Jack the Ripper has, been subject to so many, God knows how many hundreds of books, essays, films, each proclaiming they've solved the enigma, but officially never found who he was, or maybe it was more than one person. But the Black Dahlia, that was the name given posthumously, to this poor woman, Elizabeth Short. She was known as, she was the victim of this, another horrific murder, beaten, tortured. Her body was found in two halves and organs removed, just really grisly. But there's similarity there. I mean, apart from both have never been solved, so that of course leads to a ever open ending of the narratives that can be spun, and people wondering who was the killer was, and all these. It makes it even more fertile ground for stories to open up. Black Dahlia has been the subject of at least two novels that I know of, and a graphic novel, a film of this novel, by James Ellroy, who's a famous crime writer, and I've read him sort of saying this was it wasn't his first book, but it was the one that sort of broke him and made him famous and got him money, and then led to many others. I think he did a whole quartet, including LA Confidential, which was also made into a very good film, around Los Angeles around that time in the 40s and 50s. But again, the Black Dahlia has had numerous books, of true crime sort of books, publications, essays written about it as well. So I think both of these cases, if you want to call them that, are imprinted in the consciousness of the public over multiple generations and across the globe. Just as an aside, I sort of mentioned towards the end about the 1980s, this Ellroy novel was published in 1987, and that to me is a time and a decade which is of great interest as another sort of shift in the world, getting us to the state in which we're in now. So in both cases, the several Ripper murders and that of Elizabeth Short and Black Dahlia, I think it was called that. I think she was known as that because she with the dress she wore, she used to wear black all the time, and I think there may have been a film of the time, I can't remember the actress, around that era, called The Blue Dahlia. I think that might be in it, but I seem to remember them being a sort of a more grim talk of it being the way that her body was posed, the torso. Someone said it looked like a sort of a flower or something like that. But both of these cases, there was mutilation of the female bodies, and it was almost with possible surgical precision. And there's been lots of talk about the murderer having some medical training, and I think that was, in the Dahlia case as well, the way organs were removed, it to me it makes me think that there could be rituals enacted at specific moments in history, in particular places, to create a particular influence on mass consciousness. In 1888, when the Ripper murders began, they were in London, and the capital of the world, you could say at the time, as the British Empire ruled so much of it. But they took place in Whitechapel, which was a place of degradation and poverty, the dark heart of that empire. And, you know, the murders removed the internal organs of the victims. It's like it's finding it's like the darkness within, just the darkness within. The short Dahlia murder was in Los Angeles, so very close to Hollywood. It's very near the actual district of Hollywood, I think, where a body was found. And it was in January 1947. So close, you know, not long after the end of the Second World War. Short was a wannabe starlet. She wasn't very, never made it a success, but she was one of these wannabes. And that seems to me as well, it was sort of like the beginnings then of what's gone on now into our sort of celebrity culture, and this desire of so many people to be famous or to have their 5 minutes of fame. And that's obviously sort of exploded even more now with the internet, and these people with all these empty lives that they want to try and fill up, and they feel that some form of stardom, however tenuous, is what they need to try and fill up their vacuous existence. But this supposed glamour very much has the seedy side. As we know, all the seedy side of Hollywood, but also Los Angeles of the 40s and 50s, as Elroy sort of makes the subject of his crime books, was full of corruption. And I'm sure it is to this day as well, So I think it sort of highlights this darkness within the supposed countries that are seen as leading the world. And it was very much sort of after the Second World War, the British Empire sort of broke up, and I'm sure behind the scenes, the powerful people that we know about, I'm not saying Britain had no power after that, and there was, of course, we know all the links and with the very rich and powerful City of London, etc., and royalty. But certainly in the sort of geopolitical landscape, as people saw it, almost Britain handed over to America as the superpower of the West, particularly, and of course, they then sort of went into the Cold War with, USA against the Soviet Union and the communist world and all that sort of thing. So I think you could see as well the short Black Dahlia murder. It was, to me, it was sort of the Ripper murders were in this London, the centre of the British Empire, the late 19th century, and then going into the end of the first half of the 20th century, just after the World Wars, and there was a shift, and it was like now it's like this particular influence on, certainly on people's consciousness, the sort of the way people thought, which was so much became influenced by Hollywood and this sort of the image factory that governed the cultural landscape around the world for, up till now, ever since. And that was, obviously Hollywood had started, before the war, and you had the silent films and sort of the films of the 40s, talked about like the golden age. But maybe this dark ritualist murder, I'm calling it like a ritualistic murder of the Black Dahlia, maybe it's ushering in a new era when Hollywood was going to go over to it was all going to be ramped up to a whole different level, and it was going to be really pumping out this dark world of violence and perversion, which you could say was symbolised, enacted on this poor Elizabeth Short in this murder. There's also a thing where Short had a desire about, she liked military men, you know, men in uniform. Again, as I say, this was just after the Second World War, so she would often sort of hook up with soldiers or former soldiers, and a number of them were suspects at times, you know, as I say, but no one ever got charged and officially tried for the murder. So there's a link there as well with the military to the film world. Again, I know Short never actually became a successful actress. I think she had, you know, had some B-movie parts and possibly some sort of dodgy, I suppose, the early days of porn film type things, because, you know, again, where people get taken up and used and chewed up by this side of the seedy side of the film industry, the underbelly, where people go to Hollywood thinking they're going to be glamorous stars, and they end up in these really sleazy ends of town doing these horrible sort of type films and being, you know, it's another form of human trafficking, really, I suppose. I think, actually, just as an aside as well, I think the second series of True Detective, although it's not as successful, I don't think, as a work of fiction as the first series of True Detective, but again, it's around Los Angeles, and it brings up a lot of these things, and there's it's a very seedy world and very a sort of Illuminati type. It shows all these Illuminati type powerful men and how women are used to be the sort of, well, yeah, just to be the fodder for these rich and powerful men. So I think that's quite a good series to look at. But we know also there's lots of studies around things like, I'm thinking of the Chaos book on the Manson murders recently. Many other studies obviously around Manson and obviously the music industry, but also the film industry, all these famous people around LA, which Manson and the family were intricately involved with, befriended, you know, drug deals, and all the links that can go back with Manson and how quite likely he was created and controlled and a tool of the military industrial complex, and how that they infiltrated the media, the film world, TV world, music, and used it to spread propaganda, but also to and again, that propaganda machine, you can see how that was started during the Second World War, and with, supposedly then it's people say, oh yeah, you can understand, you've got to make the public, do what they're told because it's time of war, so they've got to conform to certain things. But they've carried on these propaganda and ramped them up in peacetime to control the general public, to make them think how they want them to think. And if you just think that not very far from Hollywood, in Bohemian Grove, the powerful perform this ritual to Moloch, the cremation of care, symbolising their rejection of feeling for the rest of humanity, so they can devoid themselves of empathy to control and destroy the rest of us without conscience. Perhaps in a way, the Black Dahlia was a similar, in a way, a sort of sacrifice to signal to those who are going to produce the mind-altering imagery of the film industry of the 20th century and beyond. They had to empty themselves of feeling. Like the poor woman was emptied of some of her organs, and I think she was drained of her blood. It was very, vampiric murder. And they produced this imagery which would promote violence and sexual perversion to the masses, emulating the type of brutality that was enacted in that murder. So these murders are in the liminal space between the media and the arts, science and medicine, and the worlds of politics, military, law enforcement. And because they're unsolved, there's a fascination for so many people, and it opens up this world of true crime that's become such a burgeoning industry. Instead of doing shadow work on themselves, so many people are just obsessed instead about reading the darkness in other people. So as I said, there's been many representations of Jack the Ripper within fiction and art as well. So this viscerally brutal, real murders, dissection of women, it's been multiplied and expanded within the imagination to unleash further horrors. Some artistic people themselves have been implicated, actually accused of being the actual Jack the Ripper, the murderer. And I just sort of came across this weekend, don't think I've ever been away before, but the artist Walter Sickert, who was German by birth, his final years just down the road in Bath. But a couple of writers have accused him, including the crime fiction author Patricia Cornwell, that he was actually the killer. Like with all the many theories of who did it, there are plenty of others who say the claims are baseless. But he does appear to have had a fascination with the Ripper. And he did one unsettling painting which is titled Jack the Ripper's Bedroom, which was apparently a bedroom he stayed at, where the landlady thought that Jack the Ripper had stayed there as well. But there was sort of this connection that he had, whether it was just that he had a morbid fascination, as again so many people do with these murders. There was also a later murder, the Camden Town murder in 1907, and he made a series of paintings around that. Again, that was an unsolved murder. A different artist, Robert Wood, stood trial but was acquitted. So although Sickert is thought by most not to have been the killer, but there's letters, there were letters I think to and from his family suggesting he was in France at the time of the murders, so they couldn't have done it. But there was a book by Stephen Knight, and his theories were apparently, I've not actually read or seen the film of Alan Moore's graphic novel From Hell about Jack the Ripper, but he apparently used a lot of these theories from Stephen Knight. We know Alan Moore is a bit of a magician, modern magician. But Patricia Cornwell, as I say, a famous crime writer, and she became obsessed by this idea that Sickert was really the Ripper and paid for this DNA testing to be done of letters written by Sickert, and then some of the many letters that were sent at the time of the murders. Apparently there was 600 all these letters that were sent around the time of the murders to the sort of newspapers and the police and different organisations purporting to be from the murderer, and there was just so many, and they're all very different. So many are just thought now to be hoaxes, but that sort of opens up a whole lot different idea as well. It's like, again, that's sort of such an early form of now these people being obsessed by crimes, identifying it, thinking that they were the killer, or wanting to be close to the killer, wanting to imagine themselves, but then perhaps as well, perhaps this was a ritualistic thing and it wasn't just one person that was responsible for it, and perhaps these multitude of letters from different people was all part of the plan to really put all these, again, like split all these stories up, confuse, and put these different things out into the consciousness. But they tested some of the letters, and I think one or two of these letters, again, were found to be, they had DNA that would, one of these things where they say, it's with like 1% of the population that it could be, so it could be, it sort of seemed to be linking Sickert. And I think the stationery that was used was similar to letters that he used. But there was a Guardian review of a typewritten exhibition of Sickert's work just last year. My throat's going a bit because I would try and do my friend Ben's Guardian voice for this, but My voice couldn't do it. But this review was saying in 1888, this actor and artist, born in Munich in 1860, moved to Britain as a child, talking about Walter Sickert, appears to have written a series of letters to the police claiming to be the killer.
You were saying something about 888 at the beginning. There was something lots of eights in something you said at the beginning. You have to go back and have a look at that in a minute. There was a load of eights.
Yeah. We'll look at that. Yeah. But yeah, so this was when the Ripple murders were. So it does appear, or a lot of people think there's evidence for that Sickert wrote a series of letters to the police claiming to be the killer. And he put his drawing skills to macabre use, drawing caricatures of brutal male faces, sketches of men with knives standing over women's bodies. Doesn't mean he actually was the serial killer, says this essay that was at the exhibition by Anna Grutzner Robbins. There were a lot of such letters, as I said. Hundreds of people seem to have had done similar things, claiming they were the killer, or identifying, or just putting themselves in this dark fantasy, I suppose. But this Sickert had these letters and had these arty touches, even a woodcut. So I would say again that opens up interesting things as well about the connection between art and modern art as it went on, and this violence and darkness. You get this sort of Black Mirror type concept of this conceptual artist who, goes to actually does terrible crimes themselves, or at least fantasizes that they have, and it's considered to be a great work of art, and it's this further blurring of reality and the imaginary, but the imaginary in the sort of darkest senses of it. And I've thought when I sort of studied literature, back in the day of academia, and just generally from consuming books and films, it seems to be in a shift. Whereas I can see where art needs to be about dealing with the dark side of the human condition, because people need to look at the shadow, and we need to face not only our own shadows but of society, the world, but also and art can give us ways of dealing with that, or we can at least see how other people have suffered things that we've suffered. But it seems more in recent times that it's the fictional characters who are doing the dark deeds, whereas before it was about them maybe trying to find redemption, or just an outright they're evil, they're good, and it's a battle between the two, and you want good to win out against the evil. But so much now it's the anti-hero, it's the evil, those with empty lives who worship the evil people on internet forums, and they identify with them. Just remember a side story of someone I used to work with, and she didn't know about this person herself until there was a later sort of Netflix or something documentary, but I forget the name of the serial killer, but one that was really...
Was it Dahmer?
No, it wasn't Dahmer, but it was someone else who was very demonic, sort of worshipping the devil, and and this woman that someone I worked with used to know worshipped this person who was then in jail and had cushions and pictures and all sorts of...
An actual cushion that she slept on?
Yeah.
With a serial killer's face on?
Yeah, no, and she was, he's like a hero, she loved him, or, in a twisted, and...
And then you actually look at the crimes he did, and it was like, well...
horrific.
He absolutely hated women, and he would have chopped you up, love.
Yeah, but that's... this
Sick.
And there seems to be more of that, and then just on a sort of a more mainstream level, you get books and films where the where the bad guy, oh yeah, he's a bad guy, but you know he's got a little bit of good in him, and you know you need a bit of badness, and you know.
Well, it's like the Joker films now, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. The bad guy is the hero.
American Psycho.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot. So, I mean, and I think, you know, I mean, Liz has seen this. I think we've talked about it before, but you know, and you get this now. It's with institutions that are supposed to be about law, you know, protecting people and medicine, and it seems to be more on looking the perpetrators seen as the ones who should get the care and attention, and we should be more interested in looking after those or their
He's
interests.
talking about pedos.
Yeah, a lot of it. So yeah, I think, you know, it all comes out of that, and that what they're trying, the shifting of where they're trying to shift the mass perceptions of people.
So they're not pedos, they're maps.
Yeah.
Minor attracted people, and it's not anything to worry about. It's just a fetish, and they're even thinking that some people want it to be part of the LGBT flag. Not on my watch.
No. So yeah. So again, I think what I'm trying to say is I think this sort of opening up, and I'm saying I think the Ripper and Dahlia murders are important, ritualistic times in history which have reverberated. You know, people like Sheridan talked about things like 9/11 and the reverberations. Those events have reverberated through time, and they've got all these echoes, and of course nothing is quite the same again after them, and in a different way, I think these murders are also that. So I mean, I just wanted to spend a bit of time as well talking about, for me, the connection that I think there is between the Ripper and another important creative figure of that time, and that's H.G. Wells, the science fiction writer. He's credited as one of, if not the most important forerunner of science fiction. All these themes and stories that inspire books, comics, films and TV, which is going on to the current time, either remakes of his books, or obviously they inspire other people's books on similar themes, you know, Alien Invasion, War of the Worlds, The Time Machine. But book for me, I think, in terms of the Ripper, maybe not as well known as War of the Worlds, Time Machine, but still has had lots of quite a few references down the years, but is The Island of Dr. Moreau, and this was published in 1896, so it's only about 8 years after the Ripper murders, and it's about a grisly scientist who's been disgraced and exiled from England, and his narrator Prendick shipwrecked and ends up washing up on this remote island in the Pacific, and then he finds that that's where this Morrow has set up after his exile, and he's continued his experiments, and these involve agonising surgery. He sort of cuts up these wild animals, but he's transforming them, and he makes them into humanoid creatures, so he's making wild animals into humans, or some version of humans. So for me, it's I think it links in well this with what Liz has been talking about, and what all this transhumanist agenda and all these people, sort of otherkin, and this is sort of a reverse thing where he's trying to make animals into humans, but it's again this blurring between the two. And when I read it in my first year at university, for some reason I had a feeling, I think I was thinking first Wells may have been thinking of Moreau himself as if he was like the Ripper. But I was sort of checking the dates, and the novel very specific. I thought how they made a point of saying at the beginning that Prendick, after he escapes the island, he's picked up rescued, and it's January 1888. He then travels back to London via the US. So if you allow a few months for those days in the 19th century, having to travel by sea and across land, a few months to get back to London, I would say that put him back in London, this character Prendick, the narrator, around the time of the first Ripper murder, which was on 30th of August 1888. And in the final passages of the novel, Prendick describes his state of mind when he gets back to the metropolis of London after witnessing the horrors of these beast men that Morrow created. I may have caught something of the natural wildness of my companions. They say that terror is a disease, and anyhow I can witness that for several years now a restless fear has dwelt in my mind, such a restless fear as a half-tamed lion cub may feel. My trouble took the strangest form. I could not persuade myself that the men and women I met were not also another beast people, animals half wrought into the outward image of human souls, and that they would presently begin to revert, to show first this bestial mark. But I confided my case to a strangely able man, a man who had known Morrow and seemed half to credit my story, a mental specialist, and he's helped me mightily, though I do not expect that the terror of that island will ever altogether leave me. At most times it lies far in the back of my mind, a mere distant cloud, a memory, and a faint distrust. But there are times when the little cloud spreads until it obscures the whole sky. Then I look about me at my fellow men, and I go into fear. I see faces keen and bright, others dull or dangerous, others unsteady, insincere, none that have the calm authority of a reasonable soul. I feel as though the animal was surging up through them, that presently the degradation of the islanders will be played over again on a larger scale. I know this is an illusion, that these seeming men and women about me are indeed men and women forever, perfectly reasonable creatures full of human desires and tender solicitude, emancipated from the instinct and the slaves of no fantastic law, beings altogether different from the beast folk. Yet I shrink from them, from their curious glances, their inquiries and insistence, and long to be away from them and alone. For that reason I live near the broad free downland, and can escape thither when this shadow is over my soul. And very sweet is the empty downland then, under the wind-swept sky. When I lived in London, the horror was well nigh insupportable. I could not get away from men. Their voices came through windows, locked doors with flimsy safeguards. I would go out into the streets to fight with my delusion, and prowling women would mew after me. I think it was that line in a way that caught my attention, and it just made me think of the prostitutes in Whitechapel in this London at the time. Furtive, craving men glanced jealously at me. Weary, pale workers go coughing by me with tired eyes and eager paces, like wounded deer dripping blood. Old people, bent and dull, passed murmuring to themselves, and all unheeding a ragged tale of gibbering children. Then I would turn aside into some chapel, and even there, such was my disturbance, it seemed that the preacher gibbered big thinks, even as the ape man had done. Or into some library, and there the intent faces of the book seemed but patient creatures waiting for prey. Particularly nauseous were the blank, expressionless faces of people in trains and omnibuses. They seemed no more my fellow creatures than dead bodies would be, so that I did not dare to travel unless I was assured of being alone. And even it seemed that I too was not a reasonable creature, but only an animal tormented with some strange disorder in its brain which sent it to wander alone. So that to me made me think of this, like he has this dark madness for what he's seen on the island, these experiments and these beast men that Morrow created. So that made me think that Wells was implying that Prendick became the Ripper. When this darkness of his soul came across him, and he was seeing these people, these men and women, and he seeing them as like animals, and he became animalistic himself. So that was the sort of connection I felt Wells was making anyway, sort of an undercurrent there. And the cruel surgeries performed by the mad scientist Morrow to make animals appear like humans, as I say, sort of a reverse of the other kin type thing. But it has these clear parallels for the abuses of science and medicine in our time. Although now the manipulation of nature, animals and humans is more likely to be genetic, there is still, as Liz has talked about, the encouragement of life-changing physical surgery to remove and alter parts of the body surgically. Although Morrow is presented as a mad scientist, Wells himself was a biologist, one who devotedly followed Darwin's theories of survival of the fittest, and like many of his contemporaries in the arty circles of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, saw the culmination of these theories in eugenics, the removal of useless eaters, to leave the planet to the strong and intelligent, or rich and powerful. Many pieces you see written about Wells promote him as being a progressive socialist and pacifist who hoped humanity could reach its fullest potential, but the dark underbelly of that was it was to be a utopia only for those deemed worthy by the likes of Wells himself. As Dr. Jerry Bergman writes in a Christian journal, after being exposed to Darwinism in school, H.G. Wells converted from devout Christian to devout Darwinist, spent the rest of his life proselytising for Darwin and eugenics. Wells advocated a level of eugenics that was even more extreme than Hitler's. The weak should be killed by the strong, having no pity and less benevolence. The diseased, deformed and insane, together with those swarms of blacks and brown and dirty white and yellow people, will have to go, in order to create a scientific utopia. He envisaged a time when all crime will be punished by death, because people who cannot live happily and freely in the world without spoiling the lives of others are better out of it. He was hailed as an apostle of optimism, but died an infinitely frustrated and broken man, concluding that mankind was ultimately doomed and its prospect is not salvation but extinction. Despite all the hopes in science, the end must be darkness still. Wells' life abundantly illustrates the bankruptcy of consistently applied Darwinism.
What was that last sentence? You said it at 1,000,000 miles an hour.
Wells' life abundantly illustrates the bankruptcy of consistently applied Darwinism. As I say, that was written by a Christian, so I think he was anti-Darwin, but I think that there is so many references, like other writers of the time, to Wells wanting this, eugenics. Wells was mentored, this essay mentions as well, by T.H. Huxley, known as Darwin's bulldog, and I think was he the father of Aldous and Julian? Talked about Julian in his role as director of UNESCO, and they've been mentioned by Sheep Farm, Crow 777, about how this supposed science fiction, the likes of Huxley and Wells, was actually predictive programming to instill the ideas, the blueprints for society that have taken shape in the world now. And Wells, these ideas of Dr. Morrow were part of Wells' own scientific ideas. In his essay, The Limits of Individual Plasticity, Wells speculates his theories on the plasticity of animals, explaining that the default biological form of an animal may be altered in a way that it would continue to survive, even if it in any way no longer resembles its inherent form. This could, according to Wells, theoretically be achieved through surgical or chemical modification. So again, you've got this influential person, science fiction, but he's a man of science and sees science as being creating a utopia, but it's to be done by altering surgically, genetically, chemically, whatever it may be, natural forms, the human or the animal. In his last book, Man at the End of His Tether, when he was 79, as that last bit had said, he was sort of rather gloomy about the prospect of humanity surviving. But he said, if he goes up, mankind, then so great is the adaptation demanded of him that he must cease to be a man. Ordinary man is at the end of his tether. Only a small, highly adaptable minority of the species can possibly survive. The rest will not trouble about it, finding such opiates and consolations as they have a mind for. And this, to me, could be like Harari, or one of the other Muppets who promotes transhumanism, and they're saying that people that want to adapt to the new world must incorporate AI, become inhuman, and the rest will just numb themselves with opiates and consolations. In other words, drugs, distractions like this virtual reality graveyards, which the WEF, etc. want.
The Harari said drugs and porn.
There you go. So it could be the same, just a little twist on it. And like you say, he referred to people as hackable animals.
Simple hackable animals.
So that it's just like those Wells words are just transplanted a little bit. Yeah. It's this same idea. The masses just get doped up, and then the rest, or transformed into some transhuman or whatever biological abomination, really. Just a quick aside, really, at the end, just these curious little links with I was talking about the film industry with Black Dahlia. But in terms of Wells and Jack the Ripper, so there was a director, Simon Wells, who was born in 1961, who was the author's great-grandson, was a consultant on the future scenes in Back to the Future Part 2 in 1989. And then there was a 1979 film, which we watched, called Time After Time, with Malcolm McDowell, which has H.G. Wells pursuing Jack the Ripper across time to a 20th century San Francisco. And I know Crow's 777 found this very significant in its symbolism. And there's a scene in there. The actress Mary Steenburgen plays a modern day woman who returns with Wells to the 19th century. And basically she was chosen to play a similar character in Back to the Future 3 when she returns to the 20th century from a future age. So all these little parallels and links within films, again with those different stories. You get these overlapping of narratives of Ripper and Wells, so it flows there into the films of the 80s, which is the era I was mentioning earlier on. The era of CERN, when science began another warping, not only of nature, but of time and the fabric of reality. So we'll leave it there.
Show the book.
Oh, I was going to mention this one. Well, I picked this up in a little second-hand shop. I've never even heard of it.
Keep it still.
So it's The Food of the Gods. So it's a very little known one. I never heard of it by H.G. Wells, but it's quite funny actually. But anyway, this is all about these people who invent this chemical which becomes this sort of food that basically anything that eats it grows to an enormous size. So again, it's sort of like these ideas of scientific manipulation of nature.
Superheroes.
Yeah. But things go terribly wrong, as you might not be surprised to learn. But again, you've got this idea of biological warping of nature by science. So, yeah. They've ended the lesson.
Now everybody wants to see what's on your T-shirt. I know most people have seen it.
I think we've had it before, haven't we?
Head up. I would challenge you to a battle of wits, but I see you are unarmed. That's Shakespeare being sarcastic.
Oh, he was a one, wasn't he?
He was a one.
Or whoever he was.
Well, they were ones.
Oh, there we go.
That's another
There's
video.
another Rippling.
That's another video.
Through time.